Chapter 1. The silvered glass. The antique shop smelled of dust, beeswax, and thyme. It was the kind of smell that stuck to the back of your throat, ancient and heavy. Elena loved it. She ran her fingers over a stack of leather-bound books, enjoying the rough texture of the binding, but her eyes were drawn to the back of the store. There, draped in a heavy velvet sheet, stood something tall and imposing. "You have an eye for the tragic, miss," the shopkeeper croaked. He was a small man, barely visible behind a stack of carriage clocks. "What is it?" Elena asked. "A vanity," the old man said, shuffling forward. "Late Victorian, French oak, original silvered glass. It came from an estate sale, a family that was quite eager to be rid of it." He pulled the velvet sheet away. Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was magnificent. The wood was dark, carved with intricate vines and roses that seemed to twist and writhe in the dim light. But it was the mirror that held her. It was a massive oval, the glass slightly foxed with age, creating a smoky, dreamlike haze around the edges. When she looked into it, her reflection stared back pale, tired, with dark circles under her eyes from months of insomnia. But for a split second, the reflection seemed sharper than reality, brighter, as if the woman in the glass was the real one, and Elena was just the ghost standing in the dust. "More?" she asked, unable to look away. The price was surprisingly low, suspiciously low. But Elena didn't care. She lived alone in a sprawling, silent apartment in the city, a place filled with modern furniture and empty spaces. She needed something with a soul. 2 days later, the vanity sat in her bedroom. It dominated the space, its dark wood absorbing the light from her bedside lamp. That first night, Elena sat before it, brushing her hair. 1, 2, 3. The rhythmic motion was soothing. The silence of the apartment usually pressed down on her, but tonight, the vanity seemed to hum with a low, imperceptible energy. She leaned in closer to inspect a scratch on her chin. She blinked. In the mirror, her reflection did not blink. Elena froze. She stared, her heart giving a painful thump against her ribs. The woman in the glass stared back, eyes wide and unblinking. "Just tired," Elena whispered. Her voice sounded thin in the empty room. In the mirror, the reflection's lips did not move. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, counting to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When she opened them, the reflection was normal. It blinked when she blinked. It breathed when she breathed. She let out a shaky laugh. "Get it together, Elle." She finished brushing her hair, turned off the lamp and climbed into bed. But as she lay there in the dark, watching the moonlight glint off the silvered glass across the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that the room in the reflection wasn't quite empty. And she was right. At 3:00 a.m. she woke up. The room was freezing. She rolled over, pulling the duvet up to her chin, and looked at the vanity. The mirror was glowing with a faint, silvery luminescence. And there, sitting in the reflection of her empty chair, was a man. He was facing away from her, his broad shoulders hunched forward, his head in his hands. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and dark suspenders. He looked solid, real. "Fiel?" Elena sat up, paralyzed with fear. She looked at the actual chair in her room. It was empty. She looked back at the mirror. The man was still there. As if sensing her gaze, he slowly turned his head. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't look like a ghost. He looked sad. He had dark, messy hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He looked at Elena's reflection, which was sleeping in the bed in his world, and then he looked out of the glass, directly at the real Elena. He raised a finger to his lips. Shh. Chapter 2. The guardian Elena didn't sleep in her bedroom for 3 nights. She camped on the living room sofa, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. But curiosity is a powerful force, stronger even than fear. On the 4th night, she went back. She approached the vanity cautiously, clutching a heavy brass candlestick she had grabbed from the mantel. The room was quiet. The mirror reflected only her nervous, hair disheveled, weapon raised. "Hello?" she whispered. Nothing happened. She sat down in the chair. "I know you're in there. I saw you." Slowly, like ink bleeding through paper, the reflection began to change. The room behind her in the glass shifted. Her modern bed vanished, replaced by a heavy 4-poster bed with velvet curtains. The electric lamp on her wall disappeared, replaced by flickering gas sconces. And the man appeared. He was standing right behind her reflection. Elena spun around in her chair. No one was there. She turned back to the glass. He was looking down at her, his expression grave. He reached out a hand, pressing it against the surface of the glass from the inside. Elena hesitated. Then, trembling, she raised her own hand. She pressed her palm against his. The glass didn't feel cold. It felt vibrating, thrumming with warmth. He breathed on the glass, fogging it up. Then, with his index finger, he wrote a single word in the condensation. It appeared backwards to him, but perfect to her. Silas. Silas, Elena whispered. Is that your name? He nodded. He wiped the glass and wrote again. Elenr. You know my name? He nodded again, a faint melancholic smile touching his lips. He pointed to his eyes, then to her. I watch. Are you a ghost? He shook his head. He gestured around him, at the Victorian room in the reflection. Then he made a box shape with his hands. Prison. Elena's fear began to melt, replaced by a deep, aching sympathy. How long? He wrote a number. 1919. Over 100 years. He had been trapped in that glass since the end of the First World War. Over the next few weeks, the vanity became Elena's entire world. She stopped going out. She rushed home from work, ignoring phone calls from her mother and her friends, just to sit in front of the mirror. They developed a way to communicate. Silas couldn't speak, sound didn't travel through the glass, but they played charades, and he wrote short messages. She learned that he had been a soldier, that he had been accursed by a woman who loved him but couldn't have him, that he hadn't aged a day in a century. But he wasn't just a prisoner, he was a protector. One Tuesday evening, Elena was rushing to get ready for a dinner party she didn't want to attend. She was curling her hair, distracted, looking for her earrings. In the mirror, Silas suddenly stood up. His eyes went wide. He slammed his hand against the glass. Bang! The sound was dull but audible. Elena jumped, looking at the reflection. Silas was pointing frantically at the ceiling above her head. He mouthed the word, "Move." Elena didn't question him. She threw herself to the right, crashing onto the floor. A split second later, the heavy iron chandelier fixture, which had been wobbling for months, gave way. It crashed down onto the chair where she had just been sitting, shattering the wood and embedding a metal spike deep into the seat cushion. If she had been sitting there, it would have killed her. Elena lay on the floor, coughing in the plaster dust. She looked up at the mirror. Silas was pressed against the glass, his face pale with terror. He was checking her, scanning her body for injuries. Elena crawled back to the vanity, shoving the debris aside. She pressed her hands to the glass. I'm okay, she sobbed. I'm okay. You saved me. Silas closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against the glass, right where hers was. Safe, he wrote. Mine. The word sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. Chapter 3. The crack it started as a hairline fracture in the bottom right corner. Elena noticed it a week after the chandelier incident. It was small, barely an inch long, but it marked the perfection of the silvered glass. It's just a scratch, she told Silas. But Silas looked worried. He traced the crack from his side. When he pulled his finger away, there was a smudge of dark liquid on his fingertip. Blood. In the mirror world, the crack wasn't just glass breaking. It was the sky tearing open. What does it mean? Elena asked. Silas fogged the glass. The barrier is weak. My time is ending. What happens if it breaks? He didn't answer. He just looked at her with an intensity that broke her heart. He didn't need to write it. If the mirror broke, the pocket dimension collapsed, and he would vanish into the void. Desperation took hold of Elena. She couldn't lose him. It sounded insane she was in love with a reflection, with a man she couldn't touch, couldn't hear, couldn't hold. But he was the only person who had truly seen her. He had watched her sleep, watched her cry, saved her life. She began to research. She scoured the dark corners of the internet, bought rare occult books, and tracked down the history of the estate sale. She found a diary from the 1920s. It belonged to the woman who had cursed him. To keep him, one must bind him to the glass. To free him, one must trade a soul for a soul. The balance must be kept. A trade, Elena whispered, sitting on the floor of her bedroom surrounded by candles. I have to trade places. She went to the mirror. It was late. The crack had grown. It was now a jagged lightning bolt shooting up the side of the glass. In the reflection, the Victorian room was degrading. The wallpaper was peeling, and dark, shadowy shapes were gathering in the corners of Silas's room. Silas, she said firmly. He appeared. He looked exhausted. His white shirt was torn, and there was a bruise on his cheek. The shadows in his world were attacking him. I know how to fix it, she said. I found the ritual. I can swap places with you. You come here, I go there. Silas's eyes widened in horror. He shook his head violently. No. Yes! Elena argued, tears streaming down her face. You've been trapped for 100 years. You deserve a life. You deserve to feel the sun. I don't mind. I have nothing here. It was the truth, or it felt like the truth. Her life was grey and lonely. His world was crumbling, but at least it would be a sacrifice for love. Silas pounded on the glass. I will not let you. You don't have a choice, Elena said. She pulled a small knife from her pocket. The ritual requires blood on the glass. A willing sacrifice. Silas screamed. She couldn't hear it, but she saw his mouth tear open in a roar of denial. He clawed at the glass, trying to stop her, but he couldn't reach through. I love you, Elena whispered. She sliced her palm. She pressed her bleeding hand against the center of the mirror, right over the crack. Chapter 4. The reaction was instant. The mirror didn't just vibrate, it screamed. A high-pitched, resonant frequency that shattered the windows of her bedroom. The candles blew out instantly, plunging the room into darkness, illuminated only by the violet light now pulsing from the vanity. The glass began to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. Take me, Elena commanded, pressing harder. Take me and release him. The suction began. It felt like a vacuum pulling at her soul, dragging her navel first toward the glass. Her hands sank into the mirror. Then her wrist. It was freezing cold, the cold of the void between worlds. In the reflection, the room was collapsing. The ceiling was falling in chunks of black static. Silas was fighting the current. The magic was trying to push him out, trying to force him into Elena's bedroom, but he was resisting. He dug his heels into the floor of the mirror world. Let go, Silas, Elena shouted, her arm buried up to the elbow in the glass. Come through. He looked at her. The wind in his world was whipping his hair across his face. He looked at the portal opening the way to freedom, the way to life. He looked at her bedroom, safe and warm. And he looked at Elena. He realized what she was doing. She was condemning herself to eternal solitude in a collapsing dimension just to give him a chance at a mediocre life in 2024. He shook his head. A look of fierce, determined calm settled over his face. He didn't step forward into her world. He reached out and grabbed her hand, the hand that was inside the glass. His grip was solid. It was the first time she had ever felt him. His skin was rough, his fingers strong. The shock of his touch sent electricity coursing through her entire body. Silas, no, she screamed. You have to come out, he pulled. He wasn't trying to leave. He was pulling her in. We are not trading, he mouthed, the words distinct even without sound. We are staying. The world is breaking, she cried. We'll die! Together, he mouthed. He yanked her with supernatural strength. Elena's feet left the floor. The sensation was terrifying, like being flushed down a drain, turned inside out, and compressed into a singularity. Her head passed through the glass. The sound of her apartment, the sirens outside, the humming fridge cut off instantly. She was falling through silver mist, and then she landed. Chapter 5. The other side of the glass, Elena hit the floor hard. It smelled of dust and beeswax. She gasped, scrambling to her knees. She looked around. She was in a bedroom, but it wasn't hers. There were gas sconces on the wall. There was a heavy 4-poster bed. She spun around. Behind her, floating in the middle of the room, was a window. Through the window, she could see her apartment. It looked like a painting, static and distant. And then, slowly, the image faded to black. The connection was severed. Elena. The voice was deep, rough, and gravelly. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She turned. Silas was sitting on the floor, leaning against the bed frame. He was breathing hard, wiping blood from his lip. He looked solid. He looked three-dimensional. Elena crawled toward him. She reached out a trembling hand. She touched his face. It wasn't glass. It was warm skin, stubble, bone. Silas let out a shuddering breath and leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. He reached up and covered her hand with his own. You idiot, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You brave, foolish idiot. You were going to trap yourself here alone. I wanted you to be free, Elena sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck. He caught her, burying his face in her hair. He held her so tight she could barely breathe, rocking her back and forth. I am free, he murmured into her ear. I'm with you. Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes. She looked around the room. The shaking had stopped. The cracks in the walls had vanished. But the world was collapsing, she said. The shadows. Silas looked around, a look of wonder on his face. The curse, he said. It required a soul for a soul. Balance. But we didn't trade. You entered of your own free will, and I refused to leave. We broke the logic of the spell. He stood up and offered her his hand. Elena took it. He pulled her to her feet. He led her to the door of the bedroom. Elena braced herself. What was outside? A void, a nightmare. Silas opened the door. Elena gasped. They weren't in a house, they weren't in a void. They were standing on the edge of a vast silver ocean. The sky above them was a twilight purple, filled with stars that didn't twinkle but glowed with a steady, gentle light. The house was just a structure floating on an island of obsidian rock. In the distance there were other islands, other structures, reflections of other places, other times, floating in the sea of memory. "Where are we?" Elena whispered. "The space between reflections," Silas said. He put his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "It's infinite. It's timeless. And we can go anywhere." He turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. The grey tragedy that had haunted his eyes for a century was gone, replaced by a fierce, burning joy. "It's not 1919, he said. "It's not 2024. It's just us. Can we ever go back?" Elena asked, looking at the silver sea. "Do you want to?" Elena looked at the strange, beautiful horizon. Then she looked at the man who had watched over her when she was most alone. The man who had refused paradise to keep her from hell. She realized she didn't miss her apartment. She didn't miss her job. She didn't miss the silence. "No," she whispered. Silas smiled. He leaned down and kissed her. It was a kiss 100 years in the making, hungry, desperate, and full of promises. "Then let's go," he said. Hand in hand, they walked away from the bedroom door, down the obsidian path, and into the silver mist, ready to explore a universe built of reflections, where they would never be lonely again. The end,